The US Navy just made a big change to the way it classifies its nuclear submarines, and it all points toward a fundamental shift in the way these undersea behemoths will be leveraged in modern warfare. This week, the US Navy announced that it will reclassify 19 upcoming Block 5 and 6 Virginia-class nuclear fast attack subs, known as SSNs, as nuclear-guided missile submarines, or SSGNs, instead. Now, this shift in categorization will be applied to new-build submarines that are equipped with a large hull extension designed to house a variety of vertical-launched weapon systems, including land attack Tomahawk cruise missiles. And while you could argue that this change really is nothing more than reshuffling some paperwork, I think it is worth considering that it might be something more. Not only is this shift indicative of the Navy's ongoing efforts to backfill a significant reduction in maritime firepower that's being caused by the looming retirement of America's existing guided missile subs and Ticonderoga-class cruisers, but it might also point toward a much broader shift in the way submarines fight in general in future wars. For decades, we've watched specialized aviation roles like attack aircraft, tactical reconnaissance platforms, interdiction bombers, and interceptors all be absorbed into the increasingly broad capability set that we just sort of expect out of modern fighters. And the shift from dedicated fast attack subs tasked with hunting enemy vessels on the high seas toward a new balance that equally emphasizes the land attack mission has me wondering, will dedicated attack subs soon become a thing of the past as we witness the rise of the multi-role submarine? Or are we learning the wrong lessons from the past 80 years of relative stability between global powers? From where I sit right now, I honestly can't say for sure, so let's dive in and see what we can't figure out. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Firepower. I'm a big fan of ground news because it helps me stay on top of what's going on in the world while also making media bias a lot easier to spot in the stories that I see come across my timeline every day. Ground News compiles stories from outlets all over the world and puts them all into one easy-to-read feed that doesn't just keep me up to date on what's going on, but also shows me the different ways media outlets will cover the same story. Like this one, about reports that Russia is sharing satellite and signals intelligence with Iranian forces. Now, Ground News has gathered coverage of this story from 14 different news outlets, including one left-leaning outlet and 6 right-leaning ones. And here on the right-hand side of the screen, we can see the bias distribution and factuality ratings for coverage of this story, with most of the outlets covering this story leaning right, and only 55% of those outlets rated for high factuality. And Ground News also shows you vital info about each outlet along with their headlines, like their political bias, their factuality rating, their corporate ownership, or their government affiliations. And I really love the Ground News For You tab that helps me stay on top of topics that I identified as important for me. Ground News is a big part of my research and my day-to-day news reading, and it should be for you too. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's, or just follow the link in the description below, and you'll get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use. Again, that's ground.news/sandboxx to get 40% off their Vantage plan. That'll help you stay on top of things. The announcement that the Navy will reclassify its forthcoming fast attack subs into guided missile submarines came directly on the heels of the USS Georgia, one of the Navy's 4 existing guided missile subs, completing its final deployment at the end of July, bringing its 42-year operational service life to an end, and reducing the number of Tomahawk Missile Pack Vertical Launch System, or VLS cells, available to the Navy by a whopping 154. And rest assured, we're going to talk a lot more about that in just a few minutes. Now, the Georgia and its 3 guided missile sub-siblings, the Ohio, Michigan, and Florida, were the very first of America's Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines to enter service, led, of course, by the class namesake USS Ohio back in 1981. Now, these ships were designed and built around the singular purpose of housing a whopping 24 Trident 1C4 submarine-launched nuclear ballistic missiles, each of which can carry up to 8 multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles housing 100 kiloton W-76 nuclear warheads. That was a heck of a tongue twister, but it was also very scary. Just one of these missiles offers more destructive capacity than 53 of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. And just one Ohio-class sub that was packed with 24 of those weapons boasted enough nuclear warheads to be considered the world's 5th or 6th largest nuclear power, even today. Just the sub itself. But with the fall of the Soviet Union in late 1991, America's 1994 Nuclear Posture Review determined that the Navy really only needed 14 of its 18 planned ballistic missile subs, or SSBNs, for the nuclear deterrence mission, a conclusion that happened to coincide with the shift from those older Trident 1 SLBMs to the larger and more capable Trident 2s. With new subs coming off the production line that were purpose-built for those larger weapons, the Navy was left to decide what it should do with its original 8 Ohios that were built for those earlier SLBMs, all of which had decades of operational life still ahead of them. So the Navy chose to convert the newer of those original 8 boats to carry the Trident 2, rounding out the 14 called for by that Nuclear Posture Review. And then the oldest 4 were converted into something else, packing 22 of the 24 cavernous chambers first meant for nuclear weapons with multiple all-up-round canisters that can each launch 7 long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles for a total of a whopping 154 vertical-launched weapons. Now, the 2 remaining missile tubes were replaced with lockout chambers to allow Navy SEALs and other combat divers to enter and exit the sub while submerged, while accommodations were also added to the missile compartment to house up to 66 special operators for covert operations. In effect, the Navy took 4 of the largest nuclear submarines America has ever built and turned them into covert special operations command centers, packing more land attack firepower than you can find on any surface vessel in the American fleet. And while the special operations these vessels conduct remain, well, largely classified, one of the easiest ways that we can quantify their impact on today's Navy comes in terms of those VLS cells, which are the launch platforms for the vast majority of the Navy's surface-to-air interceptors and long-range weapon systems. Now, the Navy doesn't disclose the total number of VLS cells that it can bring to bear, but it does disclose the number of cells found on each class of vessel and the total number of each vessel that it operates. So by my math, today's Navy is down to around 8,932 vertical launch system cells distributed across roughly 135 ships, including around 7 remaining Ticonderoga-class cruisers, each housing 122 cells, and the 3 remaining converted Ohio-class SSGNs that have 154 cells each. Now, those Ticonderogas are the largest surface combatants in American service, representing some 854 combined VLS cells, or about 10% of the entire Navy's long-range firepower. But they're also living on borrowed time, with 3 ships that were slated to retire this year in 2026 now being extended to 2029, and the entire class expected to sunset by the close of this decade. Then there are the 3 remaining Ohio-class SSGNs carrying a combined 462 VLS cells that are also slated to retire by 2028, bringing the total number of cells available to the Navy at the close of this decade down to just 7,616. That's more than a 15% decrease in projectable firepower from today's Navy, which it's important to note has already seen a reduction in VLS cells available. Now that, of course, is a problem that the Navy needs to address, and it has been, though arguably not on as prompt a timeline as many might have hoped. That lost launch capacity will be recouped through fielding new Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers and new Virginia-class submarines. But if current production timelines hold, it will take years just to get the missile capacity back to where we are today. And that need for more firepower was absolutely a driving factor in the effort to produce the Virginia Payload Module that will become standard for the last 9 Block 5 and the next 10 Block 6 Virginia-class subs, each of which will now be able to carry up to 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles, which will return 760 total VLS cells to the force, and really earn their new titles as Guided Missile Subs, or SSGNs. But it is really important to emphasize here that these subs were not designed from the outset with a big focus on long-range strike capabilities, like the Ohios that bore that SSGN title before them. Virginias are not boomers, as many sailors call ballistic missile subs. They are something else, something the Navy often calls hunter-killers, but most of us outside the service know them as nuclear fast attack subs. Now, if you, like me, tend to think in terms of combat aviation, it might be easiest to think of ballistic missile subs, or boomers, as the undersea equivalent to heavy payload stealth bombers packed to the brim with nuclear weapons. Fast attack subs, then, are the submersible equivalent to fighters that are purpose-built to take down other submarines and surface warships. Now, the U.S. Navy currently operates 3 distinct classes of hunter-killers, or nuclear-powered fast attack subs. They also call them SSNs in service. Now, that includes a shrinking fleet of 24 or so fairly dated Los Angeles-class attack subs that have been in service since the mid-70s. Then, there are 3 Cold War monster Seawolf subs, and a rapidly growing fleet of 26 advanced Virginia-class attack submarines, though it's worth noting that the Navy still shows 24 on some of their records because they haven't updated them yet to reflect the commissioning of the Massachusetts and the Idaho, both just a few months ago. Now, to get back to aviation terms, the Seawolf class could be thought of as the F-22 Raptor of the sea. It was designed at a time when the American Defense Industrial Base was practically given a blank check and told to build the scariest stuff this planet had ever seen, all in order to deter nuclear Armageddon. But then the Soviet Union fell, and defense priorities, along with budget top lines, all shifted. Seawolf production was cut short, and the Virginia class, you could really argue, became the Navy's undersea F-35, leveraging a lot of the same advanced new technologies pioneered by the Seawolf, but in a smaller and less expensive form. And that was certainly true for the first few blocks of Virginia-class production. But by Block 3, starting in 2014, the Virginia's continuously improving design and newly integrated stealth acoustic technologies were beginning to make it a new kind of monster unto itself. Like the Raptor to the F-35, the Seawolf still bests the most modern Virginias in raw hull performance, with a higher disclosed top speed, a deeper test depth, and a much larger torpedo armament. But what the Virginias lack in that brute force power, they make up for in new multi-role capabilities, thanks to dedicated vertical launch tubes for up to a dozen land attack Tomahawk cruise missiles, and a long list of new tech stuffed into their hulls, including intelligence gathering systems, special operations accommodations, and lockout chambers for them to enter and exit the sub, and much more modern fly-by-wire control that allows for extremely precise navigation in shallow waters. And while Seawolf subs are broadly considered to be the high watermark, if you'll excuse the pun, when it comes to undersea stealth, the most modern Virginias are now believed to eclipse even their Seawolf siblings in evading detection. Now, I want to be clear, Seawolves can launch Tomahawks from their torpedo tubes, but each Tomahawk carried is one fewer torpedo for a dedicated undersea hunter, which is, of course, more focused on taking down enemy ships than it is on striking targets on land. But now, the newest Block 5 Virginia-class subs are being equipped with that massive 84-foot hull extension called the Virginia Payload Module in order to add those 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles we just discussed. But they can also carry other land attack munitions, like the Navy's Hypersonic Conventional Prompt Strike Missile. So there are a lot of options for this added loadout. And with such a massive boost in land attack firepower, it really would be hard to argue that these new Virginias are still solely dedicated hunter-killers. And as of this week, we know that the Navy thinks so too. Again, reclassifying those forthcoming VPM-equipped Virginias as guided missile subs. Now, to really test the strength of my aviation metaphor here, we might consider these new Virginias something akin to the F-35 mixed with the FB-22 or the F-16XL program, which were both aimed at vastly increasing the range and firepower of those fighters by incorporating large delta wings. Now, this change in nomenclature obviously doesn't impact the sub's capabilities. A VPM-equipped Virginia is still a VPM-equipped Virginia, regardless of which category you stuff it into. But this shift might really be worth noting in a historical sense. In the air, we've seen lots of specializations die out in favor of modern multi-role fighters, again, like attack aircraft and fighter bombers and increasingly electronic warfare platforms, all of which are sort of being absorbed into what we expect out of general-purpose fighters in the 21st century. And that leaves me wondering if we might see a similar shift deep beneath the waves, where the line between fast attack sub designated to hunt down enemy vessels and the cruise and ballistic missile subs designed to engage targets on land begin to blur together into more of a general-purpose multi-role design. And you could really argue that we've already seen this shift play out on the surface of the water, where the US Navy has gone from operating over 34 distinct classes of at least 7 different categories of surface combatant warship back during World War II, to today, where roughly 88% of all the Navy's surface combatants all hail from the same multi-mission Arleigh Burke-class destroyer line. And truth be told, you could really see this trend shaping most major defense acquisitions of recent decades, as technology continues to advance and shrink, making it a lot more feasible to add a wider array of capabilities to every platform that rolls off the assembly line, while advances in stealth and precision-guided weapons also make it possible for fewer individual platforms to have the same strategic effect that you used to get out of far more aircraft or subs or whatever you might be using. And while there is no argument that this guiding philosophy has resulted in some of the most broadly capable military platforms ever conceived, that prevailing wisdom has absolutely come into question amid the grueling conflicts of recent years, where Ukrainian and Russian forces have found themselves in a mud-covered war of attrition, and America's stockpiles of high-end and exquisitely capable surface-to-air interceptors and long-range strike weapons have dwindled under ongoing combat operations in the Middle East. Now, the Navy, for its part, has been trying to combat this trend toward fewer, more broadly capable ships since at least 2015. At least in theory, anyway. It was right around then that the Navy adopted the Distributed Maritime Operations, or DMO model, as what it calls its foundational operating concept. The idea is fairly simple, distributing the Navy's weapons and sensors across a large number of smaller vessels, making it possible for them to concentrate fire on an adversary using long-range munitions, while simultaneously making it really challenging to target and destroy those American launch platforms. Or, in really simple terms, it's just a lot harder for a country like China to sink a dozen ships that each launch 10 missiles than one huge ship that launches 120. Of course, the Navy might say that DMO is its foundational operating concept, but I could argue that it hasn't done a very effective job at implementing it through real or planned acquisitions as of late. Since 2015, some of the only clean sheet shipbuilding efforts the Navy has launched include 2 different frigates. One that was actually pretty well suited to that DMO concept until it went so far over budget and behind schedule that it was canceled in favor of a new frigate design that, at least for the time being, won't even come with any vertical launch system cells at all. And a large new battleship that's now projected to cost more than an aircraft carrier to build and is meant to carry a huge arsenal of weapons, some of which remain to be proven viable. And if you're an attack sub purist, I could see you arguing that adding 84 feet worth of vertical launch capabilities to your hunter-killer seems like more of that same scope creep, shoehorning lost capabilities into a production line that, while more successful than many other Navy acquisitions of recent years, is already seriously behind schedule, with several boats already purchased and paid for but yet to be delivered. And that industrial base issue is worth touching on, even though we've already talked about it in several past videos, because it's still such a problem. The U.S. Navy's acquisition plan calls for the industry to deliver 2 completed Virginia-class submarines per year. And while the program was coming close to that between 2011 and the Covacalypse of 2020, the Virginia-class delivery rate has since dropped to an average of 1.1 submarines delivered per year since 2022. And that becomes especially problematic when those same shipbuilders, General Dynamics Electric Boat and Newport News Shipbuilding, are now also starting production on the Ohio-class's ballistic missile-packed replacement, the new Columbia-class, at a scheduled rate of 1 sub per year. In other words, the Navy is currently building submarines at roughly 1/3 the rate that it needs to be. And now you could argue that it's throwing another 84-foot wrench into the gears of Virginia-class production. And while we're listing grievances about this plan, it's also important to keep in mind that we're talking about stretching a submarine from roughly 377 feet to 461 feet long, a roughly 22% increase, while simultaneously ballooning its displacement from around 7,800 tons to more than 10,200, or a roughly 31% increase. But the ship will still be powered by the very same 30 megawatt, 40,000 shaft horsepower S9G nuclear reactor and single shaft pump jet propulsor. And what that means is there will, without a doubt, be performance penalties in terms of both speed and maneuverability, especially in shallow waters, as a result of this new payload module. And while I will absolutely admit that I'm way outside my depth talking about submarine performance, you should know that that isn't just my assessment. It's also the assessment of Dr. Siddharth Kushal at RUSI, and I apologize if I mispronounced that. Now, he highlights that the added module could make maneuvers in shallow littoral or coastal waters more difficult, while potentially also making the sub more detectable just due to its larger size. Of course, Dr. Kushal also specifies that these trade-offs can be mitigated to varying extent, and that advanced subs like the Virginia-class are already managing that balance pretty effectively. In other words, getting bigger does make some things harder, but there's little reason to suspect that the Virginia design would be too compromised by that added heft. And to that very point, while the Navy has publicly acknowledged what it describes as, quote, modest performance and acoustic stealth penalties associated with that added payload module, other performance metrics, like top speed of better than 25 knots, have not changed from the standard Virginia. And I might argue that that could be because it was already significantly understated to begin with. And we also know that the Navy held performance as a priority when hashing out the design for the Virginia payload module, specifically because an even bigger 97-foot design was not chosen because of its greater impact on, you guessed it, speed and maneuverability. Now, I will not pretend that I have a deep and thorough understanding of submarine design, but I know enough about design in general to know that complex machines like submarines are always an exercise in compromise. Doing one thing well invariably comes at the expense of doing something else well. The design elements that grant a submarine unparalleled acoustic stealth in deep ocean operations, as an example, are not very effective in shallow littoral waters, and vice versa. And if you have a submarine that is meant to operate in both of those environments, like a Virginia-class guided missile sub, you gotta find a balance between the two that can achieve at least the minimum performance requirements in each environment. And to be honest, It's in the creative ways that engineers find to maintain that balance while still delivering high levels of performance that the quiet genius of design really manifests. And that's actually my take on the new Block 5 and 6 Virginia-class guided missile submarines as a whole. They are absolutely a compromise between hot rod sub-hunters and stealthy land attack platforms. And objectively, a submarine built solely to do just one of those jobs would probably perform better within that narrow mission set. But we don't live in a world where the United States has the finances or especially the production capacity to build different classes of sub for every potential mission set. And while I might be critical of the Navy seemingly losing sight of its distributed maritime operations model in recent years, there is no denying that distributing 760 VLSLs across 19 highly capable nuclear submarines is much more in keeping with that philosophy than 616 cells shared by just 4 Ohio-class guided missile subs today. And that's all to say that, like building a stealth fighter or a guided missile submarine, assessing the Navy's plans for the forthcoming Block 5 and 6 Virginia-class subs also requires a bit of compromise. If we're being honest and objective about this, we have to acknowledge that America's ability to deliver submarines on time or on budget is, well, pretty bad right now. And we have to admit to ourselves that a submarine that aims to be both a hunter-killer and a cruise missile launch platform will probably never be the best at either. But we've also got to acknowledge that these subs aren't competing or fighting against purist hypothetical adversaries. They're being designed and built to fight in real conflicts against real opponents who have their own list of compromises baked into their own designs. You don't win wars by fielding perfect systems. You win wars by fielding good systems in sufficient numbers to have a legitimate battlefield effect. And as a result, in warfare, good is often better than perfect, because perfect tends to take longer, cost more, and manifest in fewer numbers. And with 26 Virginia-class subs already in service, we know this platform isn't just good. It is arguably the most capable attack submarine on the planet. And while 19 out of a total order of 45 or so of these subs will not be quite as fast or maybe quite as stealthy, they will likely still outperform many attack subs in service today, while also being able to wipe up to 40 enemy targets off the map from over 1,000 miles out. And importantly, for the most risky fast attack sub operations, there will still be 26 standard Virginia-class fast attack boats out there prowling the open ocean for decades to come, with their original stealth and performance intact. And as for whether or not we'll ever see Uncle Sam pump out another pure fast attack sub again, I think the jury may still be out. We may find that the unique combination of capabilities and compromises delivered by the new Virginias blend together so seamlessly that their sum becomes greater than their parts, proving unequivocally that the land attack and fast attack roles can share a platform and still operate at the highest levels required for modern warfare. Or we may find that some of the seemingly inconsequential compromises made by adding the Virginia payload module don't turn out to be that inconsequential at all, limiting the missions that these guided missile subs can participate in or the ways in which they can be leveraged. That's the tricky thing about warfare. You can do all the analysis work under the sun and model out predictions until the cows come home, but no amount of paperwork is ever going to be able to capture the real performance of a system in combat. You can only take the data you have now, make the best decisions available in the moment, and then hope the gods of war come down on your side. Because there are no perfect solutions in warfare. A perfect solution wouldn't involve a war at all. And adding an 84-foot missile-packed addition to the most advanced and capable attack sub on the planet is, well, certainly what I might call an imperfect solution. But in the grand scheme of things, an imperfect Virginia-class sub with a Virginia payload module is, well, still more than good enough to beat the hell out of just about anything out there on the high seas. And the Navy already has a production line that it seems can get them into the water. In my book, that's the kind of good that beats perfect any day. But we won't actually know if I'm right or if I'm wrong for a long time to come, until these subs actually get out there into the fight and demonstrate the creative ways that American engineers found to maintain the performance balance, and how the quiet genius of their design actually manifests, or I suppose if it's genius at all. So until then, all I can really do is say that, in my opinion, I think the Navy's making the right call on their new Virginia-class guided missile subs, both in terms of design and in terms of nomenclature. And as for what that means for the future, we'll all just have to wait to see if I'm right. And with that, ends yet another edition of Firepower from Sandboxx News. I'm gonna tell you again to download the Sandboxx News app that's available right now on iOS, but for my Android users out there, I want you to know that I have not forgotten about you. We are working on it and trying to get the app back into your hands as quick as we can. The engineering team at Sandboxx is awesome. I'm really grateful for the work that they're doing, and I'm super confident that they'll have things worked out soon. Now, if you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should dive into next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.